So so going to kind of ideas stemming from this sort of card structures and the simplicity. One idea that one doesn't have to pursue, but I do think is maybe worthwhile to mention, is like there are all these different roughly facilitation card-like approaches, including this and liberating structures and some others. And one of my kind of hang-ups with some of them is that they all kind of like, probably partly for business reasons, kind of like they form these corners, like it's too dramatic to say religions, but kind of like this is the right way of facilitation. Not that they necessarily say that, but like it's a kind of tone that comes within it. And for me, that opens up immediately this idea that actually somebody somewhere should make an open source cards for this kind of interactions. And that is like, first of all, you can write texts. Somebody can lay out them in cards. Other people can make new layouts, and then people can make decks, which are all like open source inputs. And you would quite quickly create something that has like similar power, first of all, because you can make decks out of it, but then it would address this pain point of like every one of these is an island trying to kind of push the other islands on the background, but rather put the emphasis on that this is not about a singular set of mechanics, but actually about a library of human behaviors and human interactions, which really is underneath there. So yes, the method syndrome and my method, like our method kind of syndrome. So that was one practical comment I wanted to raise. Like for example, like both of these, like I like both of these mechanics that I just mentioned. I like this one. Like it's a good thing. It's also very modular. Like you could have it in another card deck in itself. Like you could, it's not also obligatory. Like you could have the deck without it. So, but there's nothing to copyright this mechanic because it's not created here. Like it's an old school, like a flowchart. Like such flowcharts exist. I also like this mechanic, mostly because it's okay. Here's a practical way of like the strength of the cards is kind of modularity, which makes them singular. Therefore, if you add this transition element, you're addressing what can be the kind of other side of the coin or weakness that comes from this modularity by creating connections. But it also opens up, like, this is just one way of building connections. So of course, there can be many. Of course, we know already from rules around cards that those build connections, all of them. But it's interesting to put them in cards. But like such an open source setup could, like, somebody makes a version of somebody's deck that adds transition boxes to cards, and that's another version again. So it's all in this sort of open source mentality. So that's one practical short thought, which is not the card-based organization. That's a thought, or more so afterwards this. But I'll stop talking for now about this because at least that was somewhat of a packaged thought.
Very nice.
On that, like navigation cards, right? For me, like that first card and like the last module thing, these are navigational tools. You know. Yeah. Agreed.
And this kind of take on navigation, like in a similar way, and you can think of rules for using cards as navigation as well. Like, but navigation is a good framing filter to think about things. Like, it's not that everything has to be navigation, but thinking about things as navigation is interesting and fertile, I think. Any other thoughts upon thoughts.
What I really dislike is like the way how it is presented. Like it's in this very businessy structure of image left, text right, and then it switches, and it's like but it's interesting because it's kind of in the same logic as the card deck itself, because it's very clear, like you have this situation, do that. So it's like image, text, and it's just
Yeah, they know their customers. Like there is a reason why the deck costs $160, I think. It's because they're not selling it for gamers, they're selling it for facilitators. So that's your customer group. They might be able to or ready to pay such amount for a card deck. But that also opens up the sort of open source idea is if you don't like somebody's design, somebody makes a new design. Like in a way, like thinking about these areas, which is, I mean, content is a stupid word, but descriptions, like yeah, like you can think of it roughly as content, like text or images and so on. And then card designs or layout, and then decks, and of course there are other ways to think about it. There are kind of cards with rules, but do you have to separate those or not? That's another question. But it's like, I'm not sure, like where, like, is it I'm not presenting it as like let's pursue this now, but it's just I think a thought that I want is interesting as and has some sense to it.
I think like I just maybe mentioned this now in order to have it hooked somewhere. With Pablo also we spoke about the idea, or like Eva, you were also I think in that of having like a drag and drop kind of function for images, when if there's a website where you can have the cards that you can just basically drop images on the thing to make a new card, like some really low threshold like creation interface, so that it's almost easier to make a card than it is to navigate through the set of existing cards, which should of course also not be terribly complicated, but that the approach would rather be to kind of making them.
Yeah,
So cool.
and that came to my mind also because like this is also associating with Pablo's ideas of making cards and this direction, which also Martin has been involved in this website thing, and of course Leo has his own. But it's like something to put in that brewing pot as one possibility, because I think like what is interesting there, among other things, is that the open source is not just for the sake of open source, but rather containing this antidote towards this chamberization or seclusion, and therefore having this culture of no, we are not just creating this, like it's the same chamber that facilitation has this idea of like we do this exercise, but that exercise is almost like a work separate from life in general. And similarly, then somebody creates a bunch of exercises and calls it whatever, like workshop tactics, and that's also secluded. But if you start from this idea that actually new ones can always be introduced and things can be rearranged, the whole atmosphere changes to this, like no, we're just actually modifying behavior more than creating this separation so much. But in that sense, let me see. Actually, does your screen stay on the card pages, or are you seeing an image?
Card.
In the cards.
All right, yeah, that's I'll have to do a slightly wonky, small technical.
I wanted to add, I hope you can hear me well, it's really windy, but
Yes,
that
we
the
can hear you.
ultimate consequence of this open source approach is also being super heterogeneous about the cards that we can use, right? Like ideally we could absorb any other cards into our system and have them coexist with every other type of card,
Yeah.
and use them to their own strengths.
Yeah, that is, I think, a result that could come from that. And also because, I mean, this touches upon many things, like, for example, that game mechanics are not copyrightable, and like, so like the freedom to do that is actually already quite large for such techniques. Like only expressions are copyrightable. So if you rewrite mechanics of a behavior, it is very hard to make a copyright claim that you're breaking a copyright in itself. Like, so yeah, like, but maybe this other little morsel is kind of a continuation of that, which then comes to, let's say, a little bit more playful approach, and addresses this title, card-based organization. And this is also drawing lines or threads to sessions beforehand, like the card testing sessions, but then maybe going through also touching upon Jakob's topics and introducing one maybe interesting practical direction, which one doesn't have to pursue, but maybe it's worthwhile playing a bit with. So I then thought of this, like the other thought coming from this sort of card sets and looking at this kind of card sets, like the workshop tactics and so on, was like, well, I've long time had this thought, like if one wanted to make a card-based organization, surely that would be easy to do. But I haven't really kind of walked through it because organization could have something else than cards, so it didn't seem like a worthwhile pursuit. But maybe it's interesting to kind of pursue hacking out what would a card-based organization be. And towards that, let's see if this works, I kind of collected a small bunch of game setups, which mostly include cards, but other things as well, which I think is a good thing. But mostly setups that kind of imply different possibilities, like, oh yeah, this one, like we can put little stones on the cards, or yes, there can be boards for the cards themselves, or yes, there could be a map and then cards around, and each player could have their hands, which is kind of what's in the front of every player here. And some of them simpler, and one that was even this sort of mapping of cards from the playing of the game. But so on top of that, just kind of an intro thought, which is like, one could even make an organization or start an organization that starts to play itself to existence in the manner of, let's say you made one area in the organization where any kind of can play cards in the sense of offers, like doesn't have to be offers, but this, just to make it practical, this is an example one could use, which is that you could write a card which contains some thing that could be created or activity that could be engaged, and then use this sort of slots that is lax, which is like, for example, people, or some kind of labor or things that could be done within it. And then, of course, you could have a decision mechanic on it, the boring way would be voting, but maybe the simple offer-like decision making is if the slots in the card are filled, like it gets enough people, the card goes into play, and then for the beginning of the organization, that could be the organization, like nothing else. Maybe some rules of how do you engage the slots in itself, but like maybe even that is not needed for the beginning. But then you could like expand that organization of say you would have different interactions, like say those workshop tactics cards contain interactions, like those are normal facilitation interactions, but you could have any interactions, and you lay them, let's say, over that area where people are putting these offers as cards. And whenever you go to do something, you could pick one of these interactions and play. And now these interactions then become a quality or in the organization. They kind of set like the kind of interactions you put there start to color how the organization works. Like you could put a rule that every time you actually kind of, if the offer becomes active and it starts to be engaged, you have to pick up one of the interactions. I mean, that's an enforcing rule, but to use that as an example, now you make the influence of those interactions quite strong. And of course, in terms of, let me see if I have a picture, if Zoom decides to function for me. So okay, let's use this one for the structure. Like in a way, they like just like here, some of the cards are laid out outside. You can use that to imagine how the interactions could be. So upon that, first of all, like one potential directions that opens up from there is it might be interesting to imagine what such organization could contain. Like my having an area for making offers, having interactions for top were mostly illustrative examples, not something that one has to start with, but rather one could think like how one could use different things that happened in cards and imagine what they could affect in the organization, just like having interactions on the top, which you must pick or may pick, would change the organization. One could imagine other things, and that might flesh out what kind of organizations could come out of such card designs. So those are some starting thoughts, but any comments, reflections, questions, critiques on these directions?
I love it. It's really good. It's relating to Martin's comment before of the card making dynamics. Like I think, for example, if you would create each offer as a card, you're already creating like this modular templating infrastructure that then can, yeah, each offer already exists as both an individual card and a template that others can copy and reuse. Nice. So I think some of the dynamics of the organization are within the card using, and some of the dynamics are within the card making process.
Yeah. Yeah, and it can combine this. Like some of the cards can be set, or they can be set, or at some point you can add new cards. And some of the cards, like the offers, are always made or usually made on the spot. Like, and you can even imagine, like, to start from this 0.1 hacking style, you have a card that has like 3 main areas. One kind of area which is description. One is maybe several rows, which are slots, which are kind of things that could be filled in there. And third area is say outcome output. And And that's not meant to like, okay, this is the right way to do this, but rather the attitude of, okay, this could be already played with. And then like you can start playing from there. And when you find something that is like a still not working space, you just design a bit more to the organization itself. And also like these board games kind of introduce this interesting ideas like, okay, what if you put a board on the side where people have figures or even just buttons? What could you do with pathways? Are they, I mean, here there's like multiple branching pathways, but what could that mean in the organization? Of course, in business world, they would immediately start talking about goals and success, but could be something else, like could be mind states or whatever they are. But it opens up this possibility of, hey, that's an interesting quality that might be useful for different kind of organizing the organization.
In some way, I would see this kind of path thing as a side comment almost, to be more like a motion of constraints in a kind of, you know, generative way, rather than I would usually look at a board game as like, that's my field of movement. So it would be more like the logic would kind of flip. I don't know why I'm thinking that it would do that, but I just thought that it might. So like maybe it's because if I would imagine myself to be part of an organization that would operate on such basis, I would, you know, not having done that, but like for my expectation, it would be that I would kind of get rather annoyed that I can only do these things, rather than, you know, anything that doesn't violate them. So like, so maybe that way that the card, these, you know, fields, so to speak, like you said, they could kind of induce a change, a state change that occurs once any kind of set of conditions is met, and then you move to that in order to kind of come up with a new situation that you can kind of confront at that point. And some maybe a little formal thing, which I think might still be influential in terms of thinking of the cards. I do like, and we spoke a bit with Pablo about this, very, very limitedly still, but I do like the idea that to make a card, you may not need to have a minimum set of components. So I think generally it would appear useful that you have at least, you know, say some kind of image or title, some image or illustration and a title. But maybe you don't at some points need the image. Maybe at some points you don't need a title. So that like that the kind of what makes a card really is also very transient in a way, like that like, you know, in terms of like creative work, often I work best, or like, I don't want to say I work best, but it's sometimes just mega helpful, or just the right thing rather, to only have an image. Because while you can't say maybe at a particular point exactly what that image is and why you need it for, you do know that it drives you. Or to have just one word. I just had like a little bit the opposite of this situation recently when I was asked to kind of propose a number of things, and for some reason I kind of filled in more than I actually felt, than I actually kind of knew, so to speak. And I regretted that. So basically I should have just said 2 words and left it at that. So, and maybe I think that's interesting about the cards, that one can also be kind of hands-offish on what makes a card. When do you have a card? As long as it then becomes a card and basically kind of evidences itself into cardness.
I think that's a very interesting conversation, or very interesting topics we have right now, because actually I was thinking the same about like the limitations, but only when Pekka, you pointed out like the pathways on this very particular board game we see right now. When we were talking about like, okay, every new card is kind of a new possibility, then like the options are endless, and like it's like maybe it's just an indication of the two sides of the coin, like what a card or a move can be. Either it can be very restricting, but it also can be like limitless. And I think it's again about what we are doing with it. Like how do we design this, the move or the card, or yeah. And also like what you said before, Martin, about like what are the minimal requirements for a card. Like I really like the idea of having no, like, we don't need a title, it can be anything.
Yeah, like I agree. Like it's very much two sides of the coin. What the kind of setting rules, which, for example, having certain areas in the card is roughly speaking rule-like thing. But also like we have this board is roughly speaking a rule-like thing. What those give is like traveling direction. It means that people will travel roughly in that same direction, and it allows to like produce certain kind of behavior. Like in a way, like everything is free often creates like people moving in various directions, but also that is its strength, but it's also its weakness, because it's hard to get elsewhere sometimes with it, because there's no kind of traveling direction. Whereas setting, oh, we are now all playing offers, kind of gets, oh, okay, now we start to see the progression and development that comes from there. But the same is true for any rule, really. So it's like it's not that one is better, but it's just that they accomplish different things. And of course, like you can then have like there is always a level where a new card being created and where whatever a card is free. But then you can, like, for example, if you think in scenes, it's like, well, this is one scene in the organization, that this scene has this board even with these locations, and then that becomes like a pathway to travel, and then kind of puts the people traveling the same direction. Yeah, final thing on the map. The one interesting thing about web maps is like they, first of all, one of their strengths is mapping itself. Like, for example, map like this could point out that I'm in this state, like somebody places them on the map in the state of either brooding ideas or, let's say, image production, like the areas on the map could be anything. And therefore the map could function for others to see, oh, somebody's in like making images part. And this can be useful. And of course they work as position transition as well. Like, so like all of these sort of rule-like structures, but like, for example, having a map can bring their own strengths and own specialities, particularities into the play.
Maybe just one last comment that just came to mind. It could be an interesting idea to, like we were talking about the both sides of the coin, to actually have both sides of the card. Like one side of the card is like super free and the other one is like there are requirements or whatever, and like one has to choose which side to take. I don't know, just
yeah.
thought.
It's the funny thing is it's always with the, that in itself is a rule. Like,
and
but
then
the
we'll
rule
look at
cannot,
multi-dimensional,
yeah,
beyond two sides, right? Like, what does a 10,000 sided card look like?
Yeah, you can have certainly n-dimensionality, even physical, with because you could have like alternate versions as sidedness, but then yeah. So I'll scroll through the pictures. Like, I mean, of course, this.
I just wanted to say, maybe, were you moving to something specific? Otherwise, I would.
No,
like
no,
to...
I wasn't. So do say.
Yeah, just to kind of comment on this notion of like the fields on the map and the movement that you suggest them to bring versus the quote unquote open space, I think it's really, really nice to think of these two as complementary. Like it doesn't, like I feel it like if it were so that like the map that we're looking at, the dots on it would be the only things that one could do. I think in an organizational context, which is a real life context, that would feel very frustrating very soon, I think. But that doesn't mean that doesn't mean that there would be no purpose for having any amount of them.
Mhm.
As long as, like, basically, I think what I would kind of feel, and I haven't thought about that obviously right now, but that there would be such a thing like a non-violation, right? So you say that like we have maybe 3 spots on the map, that's everything we have. Everything else is kind of, happening about it, but there are certain conditions, so to speak, that are described by these couple of dots. That means as soon as this happens, for whatever reason, in the kind of, happy existence of the company, then the next thing, we have agreed that next thing has to happen. And so you have both a direction and a conditionality, but you are not, I think that's a bit of my point. You don't sit in the obligation to make a full map of what potentially the organization could be.
Yeah, this is why I favor, I mean, it's been traveling with XORG a long time, the scene-based paradigm. Because like if you take the scene-based paradigm, everything you create is a scene, but then you can create whatever mappings, architectures around the scene. But like in its core, the scene says like, this doesn't have to be anything. It's like a container, but there can be things outside the container, which allows this treatment of that thing as not the truth, but rather a state of things, which can be switched to other states of things. Like if I refer back, for example, that there's like that there is this place where people can place offers, and then the cards are made to offers, and then slots are filled, they move to active. That's a scene. That's like, it could be the starting point of the organization, but it also could be that another scene is created, and then both scenes exist in the organization. And then you can think of, okay, how do we move between the scenes, or do we just select, or are they just on the map and we're moving in them just like we're moving in the building? We happen to go to that scene because we find it more interesting, or any other form of switching between them. So the scene paradigm kind of contains that nothing is final, or nothing is like a glued truth that you cannot separate yourself from.
Situationism.
Yes.
But yeah, on the board thing, and I'd love to crack down on this with y'all later this week or next week or something. But I've coded some crazy stuff with this card, Jazz here, and what I'm aiming for is that we can have every card have like the possible, that a card doesn't actually, at its most general, the card is a container, so it's like a storage thing in which you have all the possible, like you have different possible meanings. Like, what are the possible rules? What are the possible boards in which this card can play? Different graphs of like, and storing different object graphs. So how these are like the graphs of slots, and you store them inside the card itself. So like how this character might inscribe in itself, when you see it, the board that it could be played on. And so there's this notion, and then there's the notion of filter. So all of this is happening internally into the card, and then the filter is what you put over the card in order to understand what board are we actually playing right now.
Yeah, there is like like ultimately, like all of these are kind of containers, and then you could almost say that something like a card or a scene or a filter are really styles of containers. Like you can like like in a way, scene is a container as well as is a card, but it just might be useful even in pragmatic sense sometimes to say, okay, we call some of the things cards and some of the things scenes in order to have this sort of main types in a kind of easy to use kind of fashion. So that's a quality that is because well, with that quality you can always add new styles. Like you could make a role, or role of course can be a card, but if you want you could make it separate.
So each of those would be like properties of the object. But so far, like, yeah, I was like the name, the description, things like this. And I was like, wow, we're getting down to a lot of things. And obviously we don't need them on every card, right? So then, but it's like, yeah, so then added this thing that just allows you to add any kind of type category. So it's like, and anything can go into these, but they just help you to find out what you're talking about. So you can type like card dot style, right? And then pull up all the possible styles that this card already stores that you could render it with, and use the filter over the card to then render the style.
Yeah, there, like, I think there are the direction of like possibilities of implementation. Then there is a direction of, well, possibilities of structure, but then there is also the direction of, let's say, possibilities of design, like what kind of things we could see with that, like that simple version of the offer in the middle is a version of like, okay, what, like if one pursued that, even played that organization, what would come out of it, and what, how could it grow? You could also start from another point, is like you start with, say, cards for roles, and probably in the long run you need more than that, but that might be the starting point, that you just create these role cards, and then you think, wait a minute, is this so that whenever you come to the organization you get the card for a role, or is it playing that when you come to the organization the role cards are in the middle and you pick the ones you like? Is it then so that if somebody picks a card nobody else can pick that role, or is it so that there can be multiple? And all of these organize people differently. So like these kind of design directions, that might be interesting to explore. In that's one possibility for this session, like with these materials, and the potential ideas that these kind of structures that you see in games can remind of us.
Did you stop talking or did you break up?
I stopped talking.
Okay. Okay.
That is such a cool board.
Yeah, that I like, of course it's a lot, but it, like, one doesn't have to take everything in. But I think this one of the Arkham games, can't remember which one, but in a way, like there is a card like here which is a role card, which is like here, the bottom left, there's this scoundrel, that's a role card. Then you have this sort of map, and also from this there is this interesting idea that the map is not somehow necessarily like a whole world, but more like something symbolic, like because it's so small. And then you have this sort of like action operation cards in front of the players themselves. And all of these structures are kind of potential ways of thinking of a card-based organization.
want to make a kind of burner node, meaning a throwaway node. Maybe that it's like, but it just like I just had to think back of a thing that we mentioned. What was it, 2 sessions ago? This kind of node based coding kind of not paradigm, but more like perspective on the thing. And I had to now think of it, Pekka, when you said that, or was it Leo, like said that like a role could be a card, like so you could give a card in which like that contains a role, but and so like, and then in a way like so a scene can also be considered a card, but like a role could also be the card giver, for example. So like, so you can kind of start patching these things the other way around. I think this was also Leo, you said that like things were inside the cards, whereas like my first conception was always that you construct things using cards. So like, I think that's a really massively fascinating thing for me, because it kind of takes me to a scene kind of where you are, you know, I have to think of this place, Helsinki Hack Lab, which is, have you ever been there, Pekka?
I can't remember. Maybe. I've
Yeah.
been in a hack lab elsewhere, and they have like a somewhat related systems between different hack labs.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. It was just a kind of mad scene. You had like in some indescript building, someplace outside everything, there was a kind of hot metal workshop with, you know, casting and welding and everything. You had all sorts of kind of, you know, liquid cooled cutting machines. You had all, you know, the kind of more fine 3D printers going on, and you had a wood workshop in the back and plastic workshop at the side, and you had the most amazing thing I thought was this cave stuffed with electronic components, great, like neatly sorted. They had received a donation from some massive organization that had kind of dismantled itself, and coming in, you wouldn't know who of these guys doing there would plug one thing into another, or the other, like the other thing around the one thing. Like there was no kind of order of process. There was no, it was not determined at all what would come first, what would come second, for what purpose, and by what person. And I think that's a bit kind of a feel that I get, and this is kind of probably going to be a longer, maybe resurfacing intermittently type of exploration, but I think that's really interesting how they can be kind of nested this way or the other way with each other, next to each other.
Yeah, and these kind of things, like looking at this bridge between game and organization, starting from the game end, is like to create that kind of a structure in a game is like, can you place your card anywhere, say on a board, or mapping, which can be a real space or a map for a real space, or are you in a certain location and do you move from there, or are you always in a certain location and it's harder to move? All of these creates different behaviors. Like for a normal company, you can think like they could have a scene, map card, which is like departments, and then people are placed in departments and they might not move in years from there. That's a style of play. But you, like, if you change the rules that whenever you come in, you place yourself into some of them, or one of the departments, then the organization plays differently. And like, this is the kind of possibilities I think this kind of way of looking could potentially concretize and then point out to organizational variations. Because I can think of these abstractly, but then I think it's easier if one thinks about them also through concrete things like the organizations of these games.
On the going back to the thing Martin and Pablo were talking about in the beginning there, with putting the image inside of another image. Yeah, like that right there. Yeah, there's a thing called combinators, right? So I'm thinking about that, like how would we write the function for putting the one thing inside of the other thing, you know? And so we would have like card combinators, where like we just inject cards into other cards at like different parts and like of their like and because each of these cards inside of them can have like an object graph, you could insert it into like anything. So it's like I might not like insert this image into, I might not insert this rule into the card. I might insert it into the board, which is inside of the card, because the card is a storage container for possible board games. It's just like simply as an easy, not to say that's the only place where that can be stored, but like that just makes it really easy to access the item.
Yeah, there is.
So you can inject through the card and into its possible boards.
Yeah, there is like I mean, there is a danger of too many choices, but like games do a lot of this sort of combination in many ways. Like even here, like this is a card, like the one on the bottom left or bottom right is a card for a player, the big one. But then the cards on the side, because they are the same color, they are in a way inside this card because they come with it. Like whenever this roll is put on the board, like these cards are put on the side, but they might come randomly. They have their own deck. It's like, oh, I get like 2 of my moves and I get them randomly from 9, but I always get 2 or 3 or whatever. And then of course you have techniques. I mean, it's not quite that here where the -2 is in the middle-ish, that the cards are kind of stacked like that the one peeks out from the other, but it's used in many games as like, oh, this card stands for a person, and then I put this object to the person, and how I represent it is I put the card behind it, slightly visible, and that then can create a combination relation, and many others. Like so that's also in the kind of structural possibilities. But if you think like anybody in general, like this is of course once again a lot of possibilities because that's just the nature of the beast. But what kind of directions you think would be interesting to explore or expand around? Like if you pick particular directions, particular ways of using this sort of game approaches to organizations.
Pragmatically, or from a pragmatic perspective, I think it would be, and this is not necessarily what I propose we do, but I'm really enjoying this, trying to contour the expanse of what a card is. And I really like that framing, Pekko, of the card and the scene being styles or operational styles, I think, of how you can frame something to operate it. So I'm thinking if we consider that cards are just vehicles for voxels and that everything can be a card, and you can have a card that is, I don't know, a dice rolled in number 3, and then another card which is a whole universe with a million games inside. How do we make these cards? How do we use these cards? I'm thinking more pragmatically in terms of how can we have this set of cards, create this set of cards and use this set of cards, and then we can play an organization into existence. And we have some of these cards in our head already, but it would be a shame if we continue to use them and they just vanish into the ether without them being just yeah, I don't know, captured. I don't know, maybe I'm being possessive in my desire, but that's my fear, is just missing these cards.
No, I kind of agree with you. And it's also like, if we pursue these things a little bit more pragmatically, it will also open new structural abstract ideas. Like in some ways, we have so many abstract ideas already, but we have mostly pursued them from high up. But then, like, when you go deeper down, different kind of ideas appear. Like, and towards that, like, kind of taking your cue, Pablo, you could even start, let's say, a game which is precisely about playing an organization to existence, and it could start by creating just one card. And for example, I use this like, if you make a card that is called the offer, and it contains let's say the rules of playing offers, and like a place, how to have a place for playing them, a scene, and that's just text. And if you make that card, you kind of have a root of an organization, and that allows you to think of others. I'm not saying that has to be the starting point. You could also start from creating a role, then creating another role, in order to think about behavior palettes that you want to introduce. But that also would open up this direction, like, okay, there is like a very early sketch, few lines of an organization in existence, but it's not anymore a blank canvas. It's already pointing out shapes of organizing. And that could be one way of, one game of playing an organization to existence is kind of like start from something, like making one card, and then like figuring it out by traveling through the things put on the table, so to speak.
Sorry, please. Yes.
Yeah, just I had to think of, so like I had to think of, like, thinking of these many possibilities, as you say, Pekka, that we know we haven't, like, maybe touched them in this way, as you say, now we're looking from high up and we've created a lot of possibilities, but we haven't gone maybe to the level of, how do they actually, combine, compose, blah, blah. And so I had to then, like, thinking that also through what I think you correctly pointed out also is that there's a lot of possibilities, like way too many to kind of keep in mind when one just kind of names them like this, to understand what kind of spaces and kind of manifold, what is it? Manifolds my light behind them. And so what I was just thinking is, if, like, maybe as a kind of metaphor for approaching, like bands go to a recording studio and then at the end they come up with an album. If we should kind of go to a recording studio and take all these instruments that we have been creating and lock ourselves in for a limited amount of sessions, or we try to make a physical residency again together, and just focus on, like, hey, what happens if I plug this into that, and what I play this and call it that, and we find some way to record it, and then in the end we have an album and we have something. And certainly, if not an album of great songs, we certainly have practice with these things, and I think we've seen them from the other side. So that would be what I would also really kind of almost desire to do in order, to hear how those things sound.
Yeah, that's kind of like the album metaphor definitely works. You could also think, like, we have a blank canvas, But not only a blank canvas, we have a lot of ways to approach. We have a lot of techniques of drawing, so to speak. But then blank canvas is like, I could do anything. But then one way to explore it is to start drawing on the canvas and then see what the shapes come from that. And another framing for it, this in itself, there's making of an album or going into the studio part can be thought of as a kind of a game itself. Like, that's kind of what I meant by a game of playing an organization to existence. And it's not, it might be even useful, even if it doesn't end up with, okay, this is the particular shiny piece we made, but we made a bunch of sketches. Yeah,
exactly.
Because I, like said, I think actually playing such a thing, like, it will actually reveal more new structural things, but by kind of experience, I can say, like, if you actually really play something, you come up with different structural things. Like in the midst of play, you see different things, like which is kind of even apparent in this board games. Even we're not playing, for example, this game in the picture, but even its presence opens up. Like this particular game starts with cards that are turned like hidden. And then it becomes a map in the sense that you travel the map, and when you're on the map on a spot, then you turn the card over, and that becomes a form of exploration. It's a kind of an idea that you could like abstractly think, but usually you kind of come up with this kind of thing more in practice. And you could take things that we have made in the game and then think of this as a scene of its own. Oh, we made this one way of playing the organization. But what if we put the same things, like the same roles, but now we make this scene where somebody makes hidden, somebody or somebody's make hidden cards, and then the operation in organization is like this. How does it change the play of the organization? These kind of directions can be rather interesting as well.
So, I mean, at least I think one thing I would like to put emphasis on, and maybe it's because it might be just because I'm looking at it only through the lens of like programming or whatever, but I think for the first card, it's not about what is the card. It's about the card is a container in which I inject cards, and like in which I inject, and then those cards, like, it's the same. So it's like the first card is always completely empty, and then we add things inside of it, which we can then use the things inside of it to understand the container's relationship to other things. I know we were trying to get practical, but like, I don't know, that's something that's like where my idea of like how I see like interacting with a card in the beginning is just like empty thing and just like throwing a bunch of random stuff in it and then playing around.
Yeah, that's a possibility. Of course, you can also start with, say, if you make a roll card, it's kind of like more like a filter, like it comes and there's sort of moves, and that's also a viable way of starting. Like it's not that any of these ways are right or wrong. Like it's also a kind of in the history of game design, and people talking to game designers and trying to find what is the ideal way of starting game design. I think the learning has been there is no such, like that people experience one start from somebody starts high up and figures out basic behavior. Somebody starts from way down and from one thing, and somebody hops between the two. Like there's all kinds of variants. But I mean, it's because there's too many possibilities. Just one possibility is to start from somewhere. By the way, an anecdote on this game. This game has a mechanic of trails or I can't remember what it calls, but kind of like retinues, that things move in like a line, like pieces collect other pieces, and when one moves, the others move alongside of it. It's like a trail, which is yet another way of approaching things.
These are beautiful.
Yeah, this is Istanbul, which is, by the way, a good game, which also has a good digital version. But okay, so if we take the attitude that we could start from somewhere, and we don't even have to hold on to the start, we can erase it or start anew at some point. Where would you start? Like, and it can be even, like Leo said, like a container, isn't it? Like a scene that one can throw in things, but also then what things you would throw first on the scene table.
If I may say, I think I would almost start with like just making a list of all the various components we have so far gathered, like from the voxels, like going through them, including the scene, including the dungeon, including the card, including the parts that we have already kind of identified with the card. We will likely not remember all of them, but it's also not necessary to be exhaustive, I guess, on that, but just like make a good list. And of course, everybody knows that that list is basically there to be added on. But then just, kind of grab some stuff from that list and start putting it together. And whether that is now to just like throw random stuff on it, or to think, okay, I have an idea that I think would require this piece, so I will make that piece first, and then I take this piece or put them together in that way, and then kind of come up with these. When we spoke in Berlin, Pekko, I think I said like these kind of miniatures, or so like vignettes of organizational miniatures, how far ever they want to be shaping themselves in the given moment, and then kind of come back to one another and say, so this is a thing I made, and that's a thing I made, and then everybody else shows the things they made, and then I don't know, it would kind of appear to me that one would get a quite some nice shaping done rather I don't want to say quickly, because that's not like a parameter that I think is important, but like still.
Yeah, the one thing, like the making of the list, I think it's sensible in some ways, but the one, maybe a caution on it is, if we start making the list, that's probably all we'll do today, because like that's.
Oh yeah, but I think that's fine.
Like, because like even like all the stuff that we already have in our collection is kind of like a list, of course, making it one place, and it will like be a long list, of course, like you said, like it can always be added to, but
but I mean, we could, sorry to interrupt, Pekko, but I mean, we could also, if that's a thing that we could do, then we could also say, okay, next week we meet again, and then we share what everybody has kind of,
sure, yeah,
stick and chestnutted together.
Yeah, like that's certainly a possibility. What about others? What do you think?
I think that would be good if this list becomes our centralized database of voxels that we can then manifest as cards. I think that would be great, because then we can play with them more easily and make more. So I like that idea.
I can also make I can make like a dedicated XORG thing on the Discord just to play around.
Mm-hmm.
That way we can have cards, but we can also talk about them and in them and create game rules within them.
Yeah, that's for the interest. If we want to make it now, we could make, like, because they can always be moved into other like contexts. Like, I mean, the boring but functional way could be like I could even open a Google Doc or a Miro board, and we could put stuff there. I know some have technical problems with Miro. Eva, you had such. So one possibility is just to bunch them up in Google Doc in order to throw them elsewhere later, but just to have them up. That's one possibility.
I'm creating a XORG channel. We can delete it if we don't use it. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it'll be nice. I don't know.
Yeah, we could. But which do people have preferences? Where do we put the list generally now?
I would prioritize something really simple that is easy to export and move around so that we can easily adapt it to other contexts. I'm even thinking Google Drive is too complicated. I'm thinking like I guess you can, something that would allow us to have them separate, like so that each card, component, voxel, or whatever is a unit that we can very easily move to other places. I don't know if there's something that fulfills that.
Like, yeah, I don't think we currently have to kind of worry about whether whatever context we put them in now is kind of like a permanent context or even persistent. Like, this is why I was thinking Google Docs, because, you know, it's ultimately text. You can like copy paste it somewhere else. Like the main interest would be just to get things up.
Yeah, I guess if we have like an easy structure that we can parse later to say like, okay, each card lives within one page or something.
But we're not, but we're not making the cards yet, right? We're making a list of stuff that we can draw on and then make stuff from it. So I think that what you're talking about maybe is even a second step. So like I'm thinking anything that would end in .txt is the best thing right now. But like a Google Doc is, I guess, the closest shareable shape of that.
Yeah, okay. You're not even thinking about going in and explaining each component, but just like list of things later to be expanded upon.
Yeah, just like kind of spit it out type of moment right now.
A vomit.
I can make
That's exactly.
A XORG vomit.
I can make a shareable document now, which is then you can start writing on it, and whether it's successful or not, like it's doesn't really matter. Let me just change that's editor. Okay. Ta-da. So it will be in the chat in a sec. So that's an empty. And I can move it elsewhere later. Like there is actually an XORG folder, but now it's just a general folder, but I'll move it. So for example, and if one wants to use pages, but one can also, if one wants separation, one can use horizontal lines, like in order to make it easier to move within. So like I could put for example, I pull from
to just take one font to not go into structure.
I mean, people can put however they want. Like like you're like, I think it's like I was thinking like, because I know there will be so much on the list that the list ultimately will be probably awkward and unwieldy as a list. So the kind of categorizations become useful quite quickly. So I was kind of pulling the stuff that we already have, like one could put like even in some ways the card as a possibility here. But
So
like
I know we just made a Google Doc, but I made us a Discord thing.
I mean, we could move it into Discord as well. Like the thing, like one good thing about the Google Doc, even it's all its boringness, is kind of cutting, pasting all of this text and putting it in somewhere else is easy from it. So that's a useful thing about it, because I don't think this is the final resting place of this list.
There's no Discord for now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, I'm just like in terms of parsing, like I copy pasted already have in the GitHub into like class objects, and it took me like 30 minutes. But like, yeah, I mean, I didn't make like a parser or anything, but also because like the data was so unformatted and like yeah, like I just, for me, that problem is not resolved. I don't know. Anyway, if we're in the docs, we're in the docs. So yeah.
Yeah, it's also like, I know that some have like, I could have used Miro, but I know that some have technical difficulties with Miro. So just not to end up in a situation that where we're taken by technical difficulties, which is often the reason why one ends up in things like Google Docs. But like I said, it's useful for now. I'll take my
Martin, from the cards we made in PyMill, are they all translated into the GitHub?
Yes.
Oh wow, that's thank you for that. All of them.
Did you find the file? Yes, all of them.
Wow, that's amazing. Great.
Did you find the file with the database there?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, and that's so like I made a function there. I need to kind of
that's the thing I shared with Leo, by the way.
Yeah. So like I made a thing. I need to kind of get the GitHub access token working again. It expired, but there's a thing that you will see in that file, a separator. So the renderer function that is online but now can't run because the access token is outdated, it will stop at that divider. There's a cutoff line. So if you like, all the cards are in, but not all will be rendered in the renderer right now, because I made that cutoff because some didn't just feel pertinent at this point. But that's a side, like completely minuscule bit of info right now. But they're all in.
So I started making this, like I even took some of the things put in the above parts and started organizing them, because that's kind of my style of things. And it's not like this is the organization, but just a way of thinking about it. Like in a way, like how Dungeon and Mega Dungeon are settings, because they have like put certain kind of organization of scenes in a way, like a logic of scenes. So
I'm putting my fingers in your pie.
Definitely do that, yeah. Like
I mean, I see there's a bunch of nesting going on, and I would it's useful, but I would maybe advise against the nesting, because I feel one of the interesting things about the cards and that radical flattening of relationship is, yeah, okay, you consider this a role, but then I can be like, I will play this role as a style,
As a
or
turn.
I will play this role as a scene, and then
Yes.
we play inside that role
Yes.
as a scene, which becomes a role later on. You can operate it in a different way.
Yes.
And if we start nesting, we're gonna get into nesting hell.
I mean, I don't think like the nesting is not like enforcing. It's more like mapping. Like it's not saying if this is, say, dungeon is in a setting, it has to be a setting. But like, given that there will be so many things, seeing this list of things that runs many pages is harder to process, digest than things being in separate parts. But it doesn't mean that it has to be in something. It's just like a guide.
Sorry, how about if we group by affinity, and if we keep the kind of association now, like proximity of that certain things now have with one another, without necessarily putting a headline to bracket them.
I mean, that's a possible thing. It's always this weird move of like in a way, to introduce freedom, you're introducing more rules, which is unavoidable. But
yeah, right now it would be the exchange of one rule for another rule.
Yeah.
But with the benefit, maybe, which I agree with on what Pablo said, that the flatness is really what I also feel kind of affords this, combinability in unforeseen ways. Because otherwise it is, I think you do. No, yeah, but yeah, I said it. So.
I mean, let's just do it that people can do it in different ways. I mean, you can copy paste and make a complete flat of things.
Right.
It's not like harm. Like, I think it's kind of veering us in a different way if we're now, rather than putting things in, starting to argue how to put things in, because they could be there many ways. Like it's not like a problem. You follow the one that you can think through in a way. Did we have a card called Infidelity? Interesting.
We did, yeah.
Apparently,
Mm.
I'm just bringing them from the database.
Can't you just dump them in?
I mean, how do I only bring the titles though?
I can do that. Is it
Yeah,
not
great.
is it not that before every title is a blank line?
Before
I-
every title, there's a blank line. Yeah, that's actually correct. Yeah.
Hang on, can you hang on, I would just get to there. I put it in the Telegram, right?
Yeah, I think I can do it. Yeah.
In VS
Like
Code, you
in,
can kind
in
of
VS Code, yeah, with Command D and the mouse stuff. Yeah. If you're doing it, yeah, go ahead.
No, you can do it. I'm just now curious that if I can do it. So I will do it.
Let's see if we can do it.
Where is the problem? Yes, called to the rescue.
Some good ones here.
If you select,
You can just select title.
yeah,
Portal.
You got it.
you select title and then what?
So I would share my screen if I could, but I'm just not going to dump it all in. So here they come. Hang on, where are we at the very end? How do I make a horizontal line where I cannot? So here they are. Oh God, my favorite thing. Why does it do that anyway? Is that a Microsoft thing that it wants to copy the whole styling?
Let's not talk about Microsoft things.
Sorry. There we go. So now here down there they all are.
Remember, like, if you have stylistic problems, always paste with Control-Shift-V rather than without, because it doesn't bring the styles.
It's fixed.
Once I showed that Control-Shift-V to a friend who was academic doing a lot of copy paste, as you might imagine, and she almost cried. She almost cried when she learned that, because she had spent so much time reformatting styles when pasting stuff. Yeah, it was a very intense moment.
Modern life.
Yeah.
I like this little side bump there. An academic, which, as you can imagine, has done a lot of copy pasting.
How else does knowledge get transmitted? I don't know. Is there any other way?
Well, I mean, that's the whole job, right? It's Control C, Control V, Control Z, Control V. That's what you learn. Yeah, so like I have put all the cards in at the bottom. There.
I also started making, like, from the perspective of moves, which is like thinking about this, like, not primitives, but like common forms, like playing a card. And then that can be activating or positioning it or shifting a card or a token, moving or opening a scene, which is kind of like, let's put a new game in, which might be useful because, like I said, it's a long list. So thinking about this actions in a way, yeah, might be.
That's great, because that also points towards the minimum viable card playing web-based whatever. So that's amazing.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking if we could, now that we are having this list, which I think is great, then play in sessions, not necessarily now, I don't think we have time, but in further sessions to flesh out these cards through play. I think that could be amazing.
Mhm.
Yeah. Or make more.
I mean, we can always make more, but I do think it's useful at some point to, because if you step to play, it's not that you cannot make more, but you can spend forever in the making of the more. Like, and you can also make something on the spot. Like, now I need this kind of card or whatever. But I think there is a danger of, like, if we just make more and more, it kind of leads to blindness of what kind of organizational structures or game structures could come out of that. Because this is also, like, the one interesting thing about cards is precisely that they are not just cards. Because actually cards were just singular cards and they didn't have this porousness or readiness to relations, they would not be that interesting. They would really not be different from pages. But it's actually the kind of structures where the cards could go that makes them different.
This is my cat in the background.
Oh yes.
There is
So
an extra
cute.
participant.
Her name is Lily. She says hi.
Where are
Hello,
you, by the way, Leo? Leo, where are you?
This is Mikasa. I live on a vineyard and in Bordeaux now.
Okay, wow. Nice.
But okay, just to because we don't have much time not to branch out, like, Bordeaux is interesting, but, like, now that we got this going, like, almost like a situation check, is this moving into a direction? Do you have other desires, wishes, or steps forward? Like, do you have reflections on any? Does somebody find it
Yes.
difficult to engage, or does somebody have an idea of where to take the engagement? Things like this.
I know I already brought up this point, but I really truly feel like there is nothing we are gaining from the Google Doc, and it is just straining the capacity to interact with the cards. That is my opinion. And I think everything we can do in the docs, we can do in the Discord, but better. I'm sorry to have a negative view on that, but that is how I feel.
I mean, for me, it's not even a Google Doc, it's just text. It's a, like, way of expressing now, like, and because it's now a tool that allows everybody to participate, it's useful in itself. Like this can be material for Discord, using channels as moves in the future. But I mean, like, I think it's too absolute that to say that it's nothing. It's just, like, it's still a thing that kind of introduces expressions and
Yeah,
perspectives.
that's not what I meant. I'm not saying that it's nothing. Just talking about expressive capacity of the medium. That's
I
it.
feel, to be honest, I feel the opposite. Like, I appreciate, like, the very blankness and emptiness of this medium compared to Discord a lot. Like, because Discord is already formatted, it already has its own medium. Here it's like just empty. And I think in this very phase, I think I'm on the exact opposite scale. I want to avoid Discord. So I think everyone else is somewhere in between.
Yeah, and I think, like, it's also, like, a strength of these forms that, you know, they can exist in any form. Like, you can take from here, say, a dungeon and think of what that would be in Discord setting, or you can think of it how to make it into an image or to text. Like, it's none of these forms is the right one. And that's a key thing why I've kind of like the physicality, but I always like think of thing coming concretized in a physical form is not like absolute form for things. And therefore also this Google Doc is not an absolute form for this. It's just a way of creating vectors.
And perhaps because I was out for a few minutes, and apparently it was just the few minutes which were defining the kind of direction or the outcome which I was trying to figure out. No, but is it similar to what we started in Pymeo in terms of expressing the cards and finding ways how to make them like playable? Is this a continuation of this, or because I'm not sure how to interact with the doc?
Oh, so yeah, good question. So not quite the same. Like in Pymeo, it was essentially kind of exploring a card and a medium. Here, it was kind of like utilizing these cards as not necessarily only cards, but but thinking about how to use them. Like in the starting point, we're thinking about like how you could make a card-based organization. So it's the more the emphasis is like how to play this, like the example of like if you would make just the scene, which could be anything, table where people can play offers as cards, like create like here is the description, here are slots, here's outcome. That's already an organization. But like the emphasis in those kind of directions is like this is preparing towards creating this organizational like roughly speaking game rules, and this is more material towards that. So like shifting from just looking at the cards per se towards thinking more on playing with the cards. But currently we're kind of, I think most of the things are listing cards or structures for the cards to prepare for that.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Thanks.
And people are doing different things. Some are picking cards like from Pymeo. I'm currently like doing this sort of not an exhaustive list of moves that happen in this kind of games, taking some inspiration from the images, but also like games that I know, etc. To kind of that might be useful to think what kind of moves could be in such an organization.
So would it be fitting at some point, for example, if a example of a possible play with more constrained context? So for example, I get an image of like, oh, I want to play the vending machine just to test what cards could be used in what ways. So would this be the place to be kind of defining the context or the, let's say, the constraints or narrowing down the specific play to experiment with the cards? Or
yeah
I said vending machine because it was like still hanging in my mind from the last call, but it could be like anything, right? Like part of a cafeteria or whatever.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that could be like in a way like that actually would be useful if you would start expressing directions towards that, because that would kind of implicate directions of play, because currently many people are doing cards because there's a lot of material on that, and that's kind of like collecting material for play. And I'm kind of in between on like thinking how they could move, etc., but then like thinking of how, say, a cafe or vending machine could play. That's taking it to the direction where things want to move anyway. So yeah.
I'm just thinking in terms of like structure of this, like because I was even thinking to print this thing out, like after this, like in the weekend or what, and then start playing off of that with myself. And I'm just thinking, like, would it be nice to have a document which is kind of for things, I mean, this is also kind of very arbitrary distinction, but like things that are kind of recyclable, things that are not now suggesting a composite form. Let's maybe say things that are primitive in some way. Of course, I think the idea here is that everything is a primitive to the next thing, also a completed card. So I'm not sure that if that holds water, what I just said. But you see, I hope you see what I'm trying to say, that this was kind of a basic document out of which one can pick stuff and then make stuff in, so to speak, another document also, or any other form.
Yes.
So that it's not maybe getting too convoluted, and this really serves more as a base database / type of thing.
Yeah, like, and even it's not necessarily the database. It's more, it's really gathering material. If
Exactly.
one compares it to making food, this is kind of like the spot where one's throwing we have carrots, let's put that as a possibility, etc.
Yeah.
But like then one can take it here or take it elsewhere to cut the carrots or whatever one does with them. So
yeah.
But isn't it giving visibility to that there are carrots, for example?
Yeah, maybe like a register. Like this could be like a register, this thing.
Yeah.
Is that an interesting word? Then I would put it on top.
You could, yes.
The XORG registry.
Yes, I like that because I'm thinking there's so many things that could be turned into cards that could go into the registry, and then they become cards once we play them into existence. And there's at least one instance of them. We could go back and like make new instances of each concept to have multiple cards for different things. But I think that is there should be a place before the card exists, where the card is proposed or on the verge of existence.
I think that goes to the container thing, right? Like this document is a container full of names. We're injecting a bunch of names into it, and then we can go in and turn cards out of that.
Yeah.
Also,
Totally,
by the
yes.
way, I take back what I said about the Google Doc. I forgot about this cool formatting of the lines. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's kind of like I have my love-hate relationship with Google Docs and all textual docs, but also like I kind of like it, like sometimes you often feel shackles, but sometimes you find interesting ways to move the shackles in itself. Like currently, like for me, it wasn't like let's find the best format. It definitely is not such, but more like let's find a format where everybody can take part. And this is the sad reality that Google Docs is kind of easy for that. Like in terms of here's a link, everybody can suddenly immediately start editing, and it works for everybody, kind of thing.
I think this is already fantastic. I don't know, like I'm excited about this. And I think, like, I just wanted to say, Leo, like from my point of view, if you want to go mess on Discord, I guess you go to town, because I think I'm going to be I don't know if Leo just froze up, but what do I know?
Did he drop?
I wasn't trying to be rude. Huh?
No, I think he dropped from the internet. Like you can say
Went to town.
Yes, he went to
He
town.
went to town, yeah.
Yes, but I think like for me actually, one could think like what is interesting here is not the document, etc. It's the attitude, like a different style of process. Like what if the process is express first, think later? I mean that's a rough way, but this is kind of for me maybe the useful difference here, that this is very much this sort of let's just express the things and then think after that or during expression.
Yeah.
But because it's often think first and maybe express. Oh, yes, Leo is coming back. So like that, actually, that change of approach is like in all its simplicity, maybe a key difference.
As we used to say in Pymeo, space first, idea second.
Yeah, yeah.
Or opportunity first, idea second.
Yeah.
Leo, I just when you were somehow losing touch with the online reality, I was just meaning to say, like from my point of view personally, like if you want to go to mess around in Discord, I think that's what you ought to be doing, because like I'm going to be messing around with other stuff also than Google Doc, but I think that's the exact point of this, isn't it? Like that's how I feel.
Yeah.
But
and I will the one thing I will do immediately after this session, I will move this to, there is an XORG or Drive folder, which is, I can make it available for everyone. Most of the people here have it, but I can open it. And this is not because we should stay in Drive. It's just a sort of enablement question, just to have that. Of course, you have the link to this already, but just to, because then you can put other stuff in the folder and things like this. So,
and by the way, we do have a GitHub, right? So
Yeah.
I'm not sure how the kind of identification control goes there. Like, do I share that or do I just share the logins? Or because it's a public repository anyway, what's the smart? Because I could just copy that list over there. I don't know if that makes any.
You should definitely, if you want help setting up DevOps, like I got someone who can help with that. But like if we want to like be building on the code base, like we definitely don't want to just give the password of the account to everyone.
Right. Yeah, I don't know how to, like, so there's a thing, it's called it's what is it? What's this link, Pablo? Like
Martin, I'll sync with you on that. Like let's catch up later. I gotta go we're realizing a possibility card for New Babylon.
Yeah, we're anyway ending soonish, so no worries on that. Like so and I think next session is anyway looming ahead. So but I do think, okay, so I mean, you have to link to this document. I can and people can continue from it, and I would kind of urge the kind of continuation, but it doesn't have to happen in the Google Doc. That's the key thing. Like and also, if you continue, express it in the main Telegram and in the Telegram, that everybody sees it. Like just to create more cross-breeding possibility. Like whatever you do, like put it there that everybody knows, oh, I could go there and do this and that. So yeah, that's and I will promise to do something, and maybe even kind of, I like what Jakub was saying, like because that's our end goal, is kind of like, or we can change the goal, of course, but like as one possibility is like moving from just the sort of cards to the actual play of them. And like I can take some like sketches of how things could play, which is not to say this is the right thing, but just to kind of populate that dimension alongside with Jakub.
Cool. That sounds good. I started sketching some vending machine, random bits, but it doesn't need to be vending machine. It was just the tangible thing in my mind.
All right, that's good, and also cafe is actually good, like as an because you can kind of generalize from cafe, like what is an organization with the counter, and then the ritual method of selection, and then interaction upon the selection. And you could make an organization that is not a cafe or a shop at all based on that, like, which is an interesting thought. Like, what if everybody is potentially has the right to be a counter for others? That's an interesting organization. They then open a counter interaction, which allows for selection, or like I created a menu that I'm a counter for. It's an interesting one. Anyway, but that's a maybe a good, like, any last thoughts, anybody, as we wrap up?
Yes.
I love this list, even though it's the expression of boringness to like a white document full of words. I love it.
It's pouring, but pouring is good.
I was wondering, should we then, when we come together next week, should we, everybody prepare 1, 2, 3, a couple of, first kind of chimera like mini orgs, just to kind of, throw some noodles at the wall and see what sticks?
Yeah, like it could be like if somebody fails it, it's okay, but like it could be a goal attempt, or just add anything. And also, like, it doesn't have to be a full one. I think many of these ideas, like I will write down the counter org, for example. I'm not saying that I will do it full, because like it's really about these interactions as well. Like that interaction is interesting in terms of directions it opens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It could maybe for didactic purposes be almost a bit nice to kind of also say what particles you have been using. If you had to kind of invent new ones, throw them in the list, but just to kind of that we have the chance to each of us get a bit of a feel. What is it that we're moving here with, and how do these things play?
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah. Let's do that. And use the Telegram openly to communicate, because more communication breeds more communication. All right. And I will now stop the recording and say goodbye to the potential people